Hello, friends. Welcome back. We are here from Relevant Connections to continue our video series on therapy. My name is Zahra Somani. I'm an LMFT associate. I'm here doing this video series because I represent my community, the South Asian community and the Muslim community, and I would love to bring information that might be things the regular public doesn't know out into the open to make therapy more accessible. I'm here with Dr. Jennifer Kendall. Go ahead.
I am a licensed marriage and family therapy supervisor, and I am the owner of Relevant Connections, and I am also on the faculty for National University, teaching courses in couples and sex therapy, addiction, as well as research.
Awesome. So today we're going to talk about the approaches to therapy. So we're going to look at when do I go and what signs should I look for and who do I go to for what. So when we first start, getting this inkling, either we're hearing about it from people around us that are going, we see some episodes on TV, or there's something in our gut that's telling us, should I really go? Like, what is this? How do I know? If it's a time to go. So today we're going to get to talk about that. One thing that I often hear from people around me is, well, how do I know if my problems are really worth exploring, right? Oftentimes, I don't know about our audience members, but I have seen situations where we're not always forthcoming with our relationships because it's so personal to us and we don't want to air out some of the things that are going on. And so we don't always know, like, is my relationship normal? Is the next person feeling this way? And so we're here to help you navigate that and start to answer those questions of when is the right time to go. Dr. Kendall, what are your thoughts on this?
You know, I will say that my specialty is definitely infidelity, which we will talk about in future videos. And so a lot of times it's not even a question of if we should go, it's sort of an understanding like we have hit a major crisis. But then my other sort of favorite thing to work on is couples who just want to optimize their relationship, right? And so this is really where, you can kind of reflect and say, are there things that could be better about my relationship, or are there days where I feel like there's something missing, or I just want something to be a little different? And so I always want to say, like, don't wait for these like mild concerns to grow bigger. Like, there's no harm in coming and meeting once or twice and really talking through this and having a check-in and sharing this with your partner, because it can be a really kind of healthy way to build connection and conversation. We might start with something like, hey, I noticed that you're on your phone a lot, right? And that's really all I wanted to work on. But then it begins this conversation, and maybe you find out your partner's really been struggling with their mental health, or they're really unhappy at work. And so we begin this conversation with something that was really very mild and didn't seem like a big deal. But then once we get the conversation going, it creates a lot of change for the better.
That reminds me of a couple that I had some time ago, where when we started doing the work, and I asked one of the partners, when was the first time that you felt resentment, or when do you remember sort of feeling a particular way? This couple, had been married for a while, had been together for even longer, had children together that were at least in their double digits. And the one of the partners mentioned an encounter that had happened before they had even had children.
Mm-hmm.
First time that they sort of can remember feeling like betrayed by their partner, not even in a way that was like I'm with another person, but just in terms of like a communication betrayal, or like I didn't expect you to do that and I felt really terrible about it and I never said anything to you. And the partner, looked at the other partner and was just blown away that they had no idea that their partner had been carrying this for, over a decade, well over
And
a
then
decade.
they feel betrayed, because it's like, why didn't you talk to me? Why did you hold this in and like not share it with me so that I could repair it, right? So that I could say, like, I'm sorry and work on not doing it again.
So then does this mean that like any little fight I have, I've got to run to a couples therapist?
I mean, ideally, no. Couples therapy can be really helpful, whether it is preventative maintenance or it's reactive, right? And so this question is going to be different for everybody. And so for some couples, I work with a lot of couples who, they came in for something very specific and we work through all of the challenges they were experiencing. And now they just really like to check in because they're busy, they've got kids. And if they don't have this space, then, life kind of takes over. And so it's a really good place for a preventative check-in. But then we can have the things that are very, you brought up resentment. And I think that is so important to note that I think about resentment like bricks on a wall, right? And it's like every time we experience this resentment, it's like another brick goes on the wall. And in any given moment, each brick might not feel like a big deal, right? It might be oh, I had to take the trash out every day last week and you didn't take it out at all. But over time, if we imagine these bricks just building up this wall and it becomes higher and thicker in 5 or 10 years, there's a lot to work through, right? And so, I think if we just begin to really look at, are there things that I don't know how to talk to my partner about? Or are there things that bother me? Or do I just feel angry because something is not fair in my relationship? I think it can absolutely be beneficial just to come and have a safe place to talk and to learn how to communicate well. And it can be an investment in your relationship that literally lasts a lifetime.
Yeah. There's two things I want to pick up on what you said. And, you know, one of them is this, well, I forgot one, so let me tell you the other one. One of them is this idea that, sometimes there are things between us. So that this just this idea of space can be so therapeutic. And this is something that I didn't understand until I got into the profession and actually sat on this side of the table of how unique a space the therapy room provides. It's not something you can always get from friends or family. Requires somebody that's kind of outside of the space and creates a table. So I had once a mother-daughter who had come in. They were best friends, right? Lived together, had a great relationship, and shared the loss of a family member who'd completed suicide. And it hung between them as a very heavy thing that both of them experienced at the same time in different ways and could not speak about. I think about this in families, and I think about this in couples who have lost, babies either through miscarriage or, after they were born, or have lost, family members that they care about, have experienced, any kind, even like a financial loss, a house loss, a job loss, right? Something that affects both of them that they know they both experienced and just talk around. And sometimes just coming in to have that space that's set aside for this can be such a release in the relationship.
Right. I absolutely agree. I feel like I could share, like, personally why I even started this journey. And that's because my oldest son was born with a severe heart defect. And I was young. I was already planning to go into counseling psychology or clinical psychology. But I took a break to take care of him and walk him through this journey. He had open heart surgery at 3 weeks old. And I realized as a newer wife and a newer mom, I was like, back then, this was 15 years ago, there were not that many supports for couples. There was not anyone to say, like, hey, this is how you navigate this or have these conversations around how traumatizing this whole experience was. And that really left me on a journey to figuring out, like, how can I be somebody to support couples and families going through this kind of thing? And that's how I ended up in medical family therapy, which Zara, I know we kind of share a background. And since then, I've sort of shifted to a little more of the sex therapy and infidelity route. But that is definitely, I completely agree that we experience these things, these really hard things in life, and we're not really taught how to talk about them or how to connect through them or how to heal together. And so that can absolutely be kind of a crack in the foundation. And then if we, just add years on top of that, it can really cause a lot of damage.
Yeah. Um, yeah. The cracked foundation piece really resonates with me. That, if you fill that gap in, sometimes the foundation can be even stronger afterwards. But if you don't, it sort
Right.
of buckles underneath the weight of things. And, something that a friend had told me once was, she had gotten married young and I was kind of like marveling at that. And she was like, no, it's great, and everyone has their own opinions, but what I liked about what she said was, the first 10 years of your marriage, or you're trying to figure yourself out, And the rest of it is once you figure yourself out, you face the world. Now, your timeline can be different for that. But what I took away from that is actually that you've got internal, like you want to be strong here because there is so much coming at you all the time from the world, right? Especially as we age, we've got, aging parents sometimes in our constellation. We've got illnesses that we're more susceptible to as we age. There are world events, politics, things that are just starting to weigh heavier on us. You've got financial crises, job losses. Like these are real things that we face as adults. And if we're not centered in our relationship, it becomes really difficult to weather those external storms that are going to come no matter what. So we got to get clean here so that we're ready together on a united front to face what's outside. And I think that can be really valuable. So, I think you're right about this idea of coming together and making sure that, we've got our home covered. There's something I want to pick up on that you mentioned in your own personal journey about um, the different routes that you could have taken. So let's say, that I am feeling, like, okay, maybe my relationship can get better. Oh, this is the other thing before we get to this that I wanted to mention that I remembered from what you were saying is that, I think that when we think about our relationships, small spats matter, right? But it really is about having an internal barometer or a check and to be honest with yourself to say, am I carrying weight from this interaction into the next interaction? If you
Right.
truly feel like if it's like I don't even remember what I had for breakfast this morning, so I'm clearly not thinking about that when I make my lunch choices type of thing, right? Or am I saying, well, I had a chocolate croissant for breakfast. I probably should either go whole hog and have a hot dog or two or have a salad. If we're thinking about one and how it compounds into the next, right? I think that's a good thought of like, if you're starting
Right.
to keep score, if you're starting to feel that resentment add up in yourself,
Or
um,
dread coming home at the end of the day, or finding yourself wanting just to be on your phone or your computer or your video games rather than like connecting in some way.
yeah.
Definitely maybe a sign that there are things going on that need some attention.
Yeah. And I think that's another good point, right? Of are we aware of the coping skills that we go to when we're feeling uncomfortable? Because sometimes we're not even aware that that's what we're doing. Doom scrolling, endless TV, video games without a time limit, alcohol,
Right.
be social. And then
Using
it
work.
becomes not, right? Using work and not coming home because you'd rather work than come home or all internal conversations that we have. And if you notice that you're avoiding those conversations with yourself or your partner, come in for some support. And it doesn't have to be, couples therapy isn't like a life sentence, right? It's you get the tools and then you come in for tune-ups. But as long as you've got a car, like I think about this, right? As long as you have a car, if you want that life of the car to go, then that means we go for regular maintenance. We go for oil changes. We, put air in our tires. We do our 160,000-mile checkups, right? Like these are, if you want
Absolutely.
your car to last, like you take care of it. And these are some of the ways in which we take care of it.
But I've got a question for you because this is something that a lot of people say to me is like, it's so hard to find a good therapist. And
Mhm.
so if you were heading out today and you decided, I'm going to find a new therapist, whether it was a couples therapist or an individual therapist, where would you start?
That's a great question. Also breaks my heart because I love my therapist. So the thought of having to go somewhere else is no. That's a great question. Where do you start, right? What do you look for in this? And I think that's a great question because even if you were to go to psychology today, there's like 20 things,
Right.
for everything. I do ADHD, I do this, and I'm guilty of that too. I'm like, I had to cover all of this stuff. What do you look for? For me, there's a couple of things that, I gravitate towards. So one, there's a logistics of like, how do you actually find,
Yep.
um, how do you actually like, where do you go, right? So there's a few different things. There's, you talk to your doctor is a good first point of entry if you're nervous or if you're feeling anxiety about it. But then you've got Psychology Today, which is where a lot of therapists put their profiles up. Dr. Kendall, there's also ZocDoc, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. We use that one.
Mhm.
Um, but I also think the other thing is like Google Maps or Apple Maps, because one thing I hear is a lot of people are frustrated with the fact that not many therapists or not as many therapists since the pandemic are in person. And so if you are somebody who knows that like being behind a screen is going to be distracting. And I mean, my personal preference is in person, using like just your search tools to find who's nearby, because you want it to be something that is not difficult to get to, so that the day of your appointment you're not going, oh, traffic's bad, I guess I'll just have to cancel, right? And so logistically you want it to be easy to get to.
Yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, something as simple as Google search couples therapy in my area, sex therapist in the area, individual
Mhm.
area. Yeah, great. And then it's like, well, okay, let's say 10 of them pop up. How do I know which one to go to? I think about there are certain questions that you can ask, right? So even when you
Mhm.
call up therapy offices, right? Advocate for yourself. And sometimes I know that can be hard when you're already in a position of vulnerability, but it's perfectly okay to ask certain questions. How comfortable are you seeing couples who are diverse, or have, like for me, right? If I've got certain, parts of my relationship, are you familiar working with infidelity cases? Are you familiar working with South Asian couples? Are you familiar with interracial couples? So what is your understanding of diversity or your training around that? What
Mm.
are some of the approaches to therapy? So for me, like I said, if I were to go with my partner to a couples therapist, which therapists go to therapists too, look for somebody who appreciates emotional, like depth,
Mhm.
and also like attachment theory is also something that's, to me, like really
An important piece.
So I look for therapists who are trained in that. I also want to make a distinction between individual and couples counselors. So when I first
Mhm.
started, so like my journey, right, is that I see my peers and my community members, especially people that are my age, women who struggle with sex and enjoyment in their relationships. Pleasure and
Right,
shame are really big conversations, and I
right.
was like, why? There's no reason for us to not enjoy our bodies with our partners in whatever case. Let's talk about this. So I remember complaining to my friends one night of like, I cannot believe that like my friends aren't having awesome sex. What's going on? And that's literally and they were like, stop complaining and go do something about it. So I literally Googled and was like, how do I be a sex therapist? Which is when I learned all of the alphabet, LMFT, LPC, LCSW, clinical psychology. I'm like, what is going
Then we
on?
have ASEX, CSET, like
Fact. There's
the list goes
whole
on and
there's a whole gamut. I would highly recommend. So I think a big part of couples therapy is, so this is kind of like, if those of you who are familiar with dating apps, right? You can see what's on paper, and then when you go and meet the person is when you start to see, like, are we jiving? Is there chemistry?
I never thought about finding a therapist like dating, but it is, you're
It
absolutely
is.
right. It's
I
the same
think
thing.
research shows that it takes an average of three sometimes therapists to find one that you connect with. So if you don't feel good on the first one, if you want to give it a second shot, that's fine. And you can find somebody else, right? Like you're not going to marry the first person that you date necessarily unless you really do love them. In which case it's totally, if you connect, you connect, and that's great. Maybe your dating profile, search engine things are optimized to not to go through the drama. But I think, part of it is in-person chemistry. And so much of even the research shows that the therapeutic benefits doesn't actually matter what model you use. 70% of
Right.
it is the relationship you build with the
The
therapist.
therapist get you.
That being said, so the first thing is like you can truly find a connection, and some people really like, so like I've heard people say like, I don't like when somebody's just like, oh, okay, tell me more, and doesn't give me anything.
Yeah.
I think that's a South Asian thing, like give me something to do, or an anxiety.
Right. No, I think that is pretty I hear that a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So thinking about like what is the expectation that you have? Do you want to be challenged and pushed with certain questions? Do you like homework? Do you not have time for homework? And those are some of the things that you can ask or sort of inquire in your therapy. But also something that I'm gonna put out there is that, LPCs they're licensed professional counselors. So they are trained in individual therapy. LMFTs are licensed marriage and family therapists, and we have a very different training. It's systems theory. And so we are trained to work in systems and to look at relationships, and not just how does my sort of background influence the way that my behaviors are, but then how do I show up in a relationship? And then how does this person respond? And so on and so forth, the reciprocal action.
And
So
to go even
while,
more than that, how does my community impact me? How does my
exactly,
society impact me? Like it's about more than just us. There's so many
exactly.
different factors.
Exactly. It's not just the relationship, but it's the relationships that you have within that. So, in our culture, I know it's like when you marry the person, you marry their family. And in South Asian families, especially for a lot of us, the extended family and the community play a huge role in our dynamics. In fact, my research in my master's was on the impact of gender role expectations on women. And what we found was that actually the relationship didn't really impact the well-being of the woman, or like the gender role expectations didn't play up in the relationship, but there was lower well-being with women that had nothing to do with her relationship. And there's a good chance I get to explore this more of, is it coming from their community members? So
Yeah.
taking these things into consideration is something that we're trained to do. And it's something that our entire, so it's not that I take a class on couples and sex, it's that my entire 2.5+ years of training is on
Mhm.
working with couples and families and relationships and
Right.
systems in society. So you've got a very different approach when you're coming to a couples therapist.
Absolutely. I
Thanks for my
totally
TED Talk. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. I love advocating for us. I feel like I know the distinctions. Yeah.
No, I love that. And that is definitely why I chose the MFT route over the LPC or the social work, because I wanted that specific systemic, because it just made sense to me. I was like, I'm an individual within all of these different places. I am a daughter, I am a sister, I am a wife, and I am a mother, right? And so it's not just like me, it's me with all of these people. And so, yeah, I found that definitely aligned with my way of thinking. So,
Yeah. Anything else you would add to the question you asked me of like what to look for when you go to a couples therapist or any therapist?
Um, let's see, what do I get asked a lot? Those are a lot of the main questions. I have noticed very much we do like a 15-minute free consultation, right? And so if you call our office and you're interested in working with the therapist, you do get to talk to them. And I found that a lot of people are doing their due diligence and they're having those conversations. And I think that is a really great thing. And so if I was looking for a therapist, that would certainly be something that I would want to do first, is like, can I just have that 15-minute phone call? Can I ask you what you specialize? What do you see most often? Is this something that you have worked with before? And then if it is, and I feel like it was a good connection, I would probably take the next step and schedule that first appointment. But then I would always know that even after the first appointment, if it doesn't feel right, or if I don't feel like, um, well, but I do want to caveat that I had a client tell me the other day, he said, when you meet with a therapist, it's like binging a Netflix show. You got to at least get 3 episodes in to know if it's a good show, right? And so I'm like, I value that. I was like, yes, okay, so
Yeah.
maybe three sessions in to really know, like, can my therapist understand me? Did they get my issues? Are they seeing like the issues from my perspective? And those are all really important factors. So
Yeah. I appreciate that too, especially so I come from an education background, and that's always like the trick too in classrooms is like you may not jive with your students or your teacher the first couple of weeks, but then they grow on you and you realize, okay,
right,
like this is a good relationship. And one thing that I would evaluate, right? So give it a couple chances. Also, something to note, right, is when we come in for therapy, especially couples and family, is like sometimes it's like a crisis of like, oh my God, things are so bad at home. It
right,
took many years for that problem to solidify, so it's not going to
right.
fix the session. So it does take an investment of a few sessions to start seeing, some of that relief stick. But I think also, when you are thinking about after, let's say the first, so, we've talked about how do I get to the therapist to begin with? So you look at their, what they specialize in, you call them up, you say, do you have X, Y, and Z? How do you feel about working with this, your experience? Then when you get to the session, how do you understand, how you're feeling about the therapist that you're working with? And I would get curious, right? About, is it like, is there resistance that I'm facing because they're telling me things that I haven't wanted to hear? And is that part of the hesitation? Or do I actually feel unheard
Right.
and missed? And that's part of that is it's okay to say that to your therapist. It could be a miss.
100%.
And if it keeps happening, or if you feel like you're having to do the education for your therapist, then maybe it's time to consider somebody who maybe already has those competencies so that you're not having to take the weight of that.
Yes, I completely agree with that one.
Yeah.
But I do want to caveat, like you bring up a good point, is if you come and you're working with me and you're a couple, the first question I'm going to ask is, how are you feeling coming to couples therapy today? Because 97% of the time people are nervous, right?
Yeah.
And so, and I have noticed there's a huge shift that happens between our first session when we're getting to know each other and the therapeutic process. And we're just kind of going through history versus that like second session where people feel much more comfortable. There's a lot less nervousness and anxiety. And that really does feel where I get to know people a little bit better because I'm not meeting kind of that first time person. We're really like getting to know one another.
Yeah. Something that that this makes me think about, right, is so for me, the first time that I met my therapist that I see, I was, too cool for school. So I literally walked in and I was like, this is dumb. You're dumb. I'm really smart. What are you going to offer me?
That
I'm going
happens.
because it's cool and because somebody said I should go. That should have been feedback for me, but I was like, whatever. Right? But like I got this. So like maybe I get a little angry, but like I'm not really sure how you can help me. And like 2 years later, I was like, hi, your work is so amazing that I am now applying to school.
I want to be a therapist
Yeah.
now.
Correct, right? So, most of them have a lot of patience and once you give it a chance, oftentimes there's like a good gelling. I think the other thing I want to say, especially to my South Asian peeps out there, is that there's this, I often hear from people in my community of I cannot talk to somebody else. I just can't.
Right.
That's, I don't know if how often you hear this too, but I sense that more from some communities who are less likely to approach therapy, that I just cannot. There's a cultural sort of injunction to keep things at home and like that
Right.
we don't share outside. And to that, I really like, I know and I've seen that that's a really big barrier to the first step of accessing therapy.
Of
Um,
course.
but to that, I always think like everyone starts with the first. Your friend, your spouse, are all people that at one point weren't in your life, that you eventually opened up to or did start talking to. And that part of relationship building is time and patience. Um,
Mhm.
but to show up and try and see, because the cost benefit of carrying that with us and the perceived fear or inability to speak, it ends up being really costly to our health outcomes, to our relationship outcomes, to our extended family, whether it's our parents or our kids. It feels impossible to talk to somebody new until you show up in the office and you do. Most of us are very kind, and we have the skills to create the space, um, for conversation.
I love that. And I think, or listening to you talk, I hear so many of my clients saying they want to break those generational curses, right? They want to break those generational patterns. And like, if we keep hearing advice or dealing with issues in the same way that our parents or our parents' parents or our family members have, how are we going to be able to be objective and develop new insights? And so that is where coming and having, somebody like an outsider be able to share their observations or give you that feedback. And that really is a good way to help begin the process of breaking those generational patterns.
Yeah. I love to say that my parents did the best they could,
Of
and
course.
we have more tools than they did. Let's use them.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. What another great conversation. Audience, thank you so much for joining us again today as we talked about when the right time is to go for therapy. Who do I go to? What's the benefit of couples versus individuals? I'm glad you stayed with us up until now if you did. If you have questions, if you have more things you want to hear about, let us know and we'll jump back on to do another conversation. But until then, see you later.